They are known as the Seven Sisters, the Star Maidens, the Keepers. Across every ancient culture on Earth, the Pleiades star cluster was more than just stars. It was a home, a memory, a promise. In the 20th century, that ancient whisper became a clear message. Contactees claimed to meet them, benevolent, human-like beings of staggering advancement. They spoke of our shared genetics, of observing our self-destructive path, and of a cosmic principle that forbids them from saving us from ourselves. Are the Pleiadians our cosmic siblings, watching from 440 light-years away, a psychological archetype for our highest ideals, or something else entirely? This is not a story about little green men. This is the story of humanity's deepest hope, that we are not alone, and that our struggles are witnessed. For as long as humanity has looked up at the night sky, it has projected meaning onto the stars. Ancient people did not see the heavens as empty space, but as a living map filled with intention, intelligence, and memory. Among the countless star clusters visible to the naked eye, few have held as much symbolic and esoteric significance as the Pleiades. Known across cultures by different names, the Seven Sisters, the Subtle Fires, the Star Maidens, the Pleiades have been woven into mythology, cosmology, and spiritual belief systems for thousands of years. In modern times, this ancient fascination has taken on a new form, the idea that the Pleiades are not merely a cluster of stars, but the home system of an advanced, non-human intelligence known as the Pleiadians. According to those who believe in their existence, the Pleiadians are not invaders or conquerors, but observers, genetic contributors, and long-term participants in human development. This documentary examines where those ideas came from, how they evolved, and why they persist. Astronomically, the Pleiades are a young open star cluster located approximately 440 light-years from Earth in the constellation Taurus. To modern science, they are a collection of hot blue stars formed roughly 100 million years ago, far younger than Earth itself. From a purely astrophysical standpoint, this youth presents an immediate contradiction to claims that the Pleiades host ancient civilizations millions of years older than humanity, yet proponents of the Pleiadian narrative argue that physical astronomy only describes what is visible in the electromagnetic spectrum, not what may exist beyond it. They suggest that advanced civilizations may inhabit dimensions, frequencies, or forms of matter that are currently undetectable by human instruments. This distinction between observable astronomy and metaphysical cosmology forms the foundation upon which most Pleiadian belief systems are built. The earliest roots of the Pleiadian narrative can be traced not to science fiction, but to mythology. In ancient Sumerian texts, the Pleiades were associated with divine beings connected to creation cycles and cosmic order. In Greek mythology, the Seven Sisters were companions of Artemis, transformed into stars to escape pursuit. Indigenous cultures across the Americas described the Pleiades as ancestral spirits who descended to Earth and later returned to the sky. In Japan, the cluster was called Subaru, symbolizing unity and guidance. While these stories differ in detail, they share a recurring theme. Beings associated with the Pleiades act as guides, teachers, or protectors rather than rulers. Modern Pleiadian lore draws heavily on this archetype, reframing ancient myths as distorted memories of real extraterrestrial contact. The modern concept of the Pleiadians as a distinct alien race emerged primarily in the mid-20th century, alongside the broader UFO contactee movement. During the 1950s and 1960s, individuals such as George Adamski claimed direct encounters with benevolent humanoid beings from nearby star systems. Although Adamski himself did not emphasize the Pleiades specifically, his descriptions of tall, human-like extraterrestrials set the template for what would later be labeled as Nordic aliens. These beings were described as physically indistinguishable from humans, often more symmetrical, more serene, and more emotionally controlled. As UFO literature expanded, later contactees began to identify these entities explicitly as Pleiadians, citing telepathic communications rather than physical meetings. One of the most influential figures in shaping contemporary Pleiadian belief is Billy Meier, a Swiss contactee who began publishing claims in the 1970s. Meier asserted that he was in ongoing contact with beings from the Pleiades, or more precisely, from a region he called the Pleiades-Pleiadian system. According to Meier, these beings were humanoid, technologically advanced, and deeply concerned with human self-destruction, particularly through nuclear weapons and environmental collapse. His accounts introduced several key elements that would become standard in Pleiadian narratives: time travel, genetic manipulation, Earth as a long-term experimental project, and humanity's potential to either evolve consciously or annihilate itself. Central to Pleiadian lore is the claim that they are genetically related to humans. Believers argue that the striking similarity between reported Pleiadian appearances and human physiology is not coincidence, but evidence of shared ancestry. Some versions of this narrative propose that early humans were genetically engineered or selectively bred using Pleiadian DNA to accelerate cognitive development. Others suggest that humans and Pleiadians diverged from a common ancestral species millions of years ago, with Pleiadians continuing to evolve technologically and spiritually while humans developed in isolation. These claims are not supported by mainstream genetics, but they persist because they offer a compelling explanation for both humanity's intelligence and its internal contradictions, our capacity for compassion alongside our capacity for violence. Another defining feature of Pleiadian mythology is their alleged agenda. Unlike narratives involving hostile extraterrestrial forces, the Pleiadians are almost universally portrayed as non-interventionist observers. They are said to follow strict ethical principles that prohibit direct interference in human affairs. Instead, their influence is believed to occur subtly through inspiration, intuition, and limited contact with specific individuals. According to contact accounts, the Pleiadians view humanity as a civilization in adolescence, capable of remarkable growth but prone to self-destructive behavior. Their primary concern, as described by believers, is whether humanity will achieve technological power faster than moral maturity. This leads to one of the most controversial aspects of the Pleiadian narrative, the idea that human history is periodically reset or guided. Some accounts claim that ancient civilizations, such as Atlantis and Lemuria, were advanced societies influenced or co-created by Pleiadian knowledge, only to collapse due to misuse of technology or internal conflict. In this framework, modern humanity is seen as the latest iteration in a long cycle of rise and collapse, with extraterrestrial observers monitoring whether this time will be different. These claims blur the line between mythology, speculative history, and spiritual allegory, making them difficult to falsify and therefore resilient. Skeptics argue that the Pleiadian narrative reflects human psychological needs rather than external reality. The image of benevolent cosmic siblings offers comfort in an era defined by existential threats, from nuclear war to climate collapse. It externalizes responsibility for guidance while preserving human agency. If help exists but cannot interfere, then humanity must still choose its own path. From this perspective, Pleiadians function less as literal beings and more as symbolic constructs representing humanity's higher aspirations and fears. Yet for believers, the consistency of reports across decades and cultures suggests something more than imagination at work. As this video progresses, we will examine the Pleiadian narrative from multiple angles: historical, psychological, cultural, and speculative. We will explore how claims evolved, why certain themes repeat, and what these stories reveal about humanity's relationship with the unknown. Whether the Pleiadians are extraterrestrial beings, interdimensional intelligences, or symbolic projections, their presence in modern belief systems raises important questions. Why do humans continue to look to the stars for origin stories? Why do narratives of benevolent observers persist even in the absence of physical evidence? And what does this say about our collective understanding of ourselves? The structure of Pleiadian civilization, society, ethics, and technology. Accounts describing Pleiadian civilization are remarkably consistent across decades of contact literature, despite originating from individuals with no direct connection to one another. According to these narratives, Pleiadian society is not organized around competition, hierarchy, or resource accumulation in the way human civilizations historically have been. Instead, it is described as post-scarcity, non-monetary, and fundamentally cooperative. Believers claim this societal structure emerged not through idealism but through necessity, following periods of catastrophic self-destruction similar to those humanity now risks. In this framing, Pleiadian civilization represents a possible future trajectory for humanity, one achieved only after confronting the consequences of unchecked technological growth without corresponding ethical development. Pleiadian social organization is said to be decentralized, with no permanent ruling class, military authority, or political state as humans understand it. Decision-making allegedly occurs through councils composed of individuals selected for experiential wisdom rather than power. These councils are described not as governing bodies, but as coordinators, facilitating consensus rather than enforcing law. Proponents argue that advanced civilizations eventually abandon coercive governance models because they are inefficient and destabilizing once technology makes physical force obsolete. In this view, social harmony is maintained not by surveillance or punishment, but by a collective understanding that individual actions directly affect the whole. Education, according to contact narratives, is lifelong and experiential. Pleiadians are said to place greater emphasis on emotional intelligence, ethical reasoning, and perception training than on memorization or technical specialization. Knowledge is not treated as proprietary or competitive. Instead, information is freely shared once an individual demonstrates the maturity required to apply it responsibly. This principle is often contrasted with human secrecy surrounding advanced technologies, particularly military and surveillance systems. Within the Pleiadian framework, withholding knowledge is considered a sign of social immaturity rather than strategic wisdom. One of the most frequently cited aspects of Pleiadian civilization is its relationship to technology. While often described as technologically advanced far beyond current human capability, Pleiadian tools are said to be secondary to consciousness itself. Spacecraft, energy systems, and communication devices are portrayed not as independent machines, but as extensions of biological or cognitive processes. Propulsion systems are commonly described as gravity-based or field-manipulating rather than fuel-dependent, suggesting mastery over fundamental forces rather than incremental engineering. These craft are often depicted as semi-organic or responsive to mental input, blurring the distinction between pilot and vehicle. Energy generation within Pleiadian society is described as clean, abundant, and non-extractive. Rather than mining or combustion, energy is said to be drawn from ambient fields, vacuum energy, zero-point fluctuations, or stellar harmonics depending on the source. These descriptions often mirror speculative human physics, particularly theories that remain mathematically plausible but experimentally unverified. Critics point out that such parallels suggest human imagination extrapolating from emerging scientific concepts rather than evidence of external instruction. Believers counter that these similarities reflect early human rediscovery of principles long mastered elsewhere. Medical and biological technologies attributed to the Pleiadians further reinforce the theme of integration rather than domination. Disease, according to these narratives, is largely eliminated not through pharmaceutical intervention, but through genetic stability, environmental harmony, and psychological coherence. Healing is described as a process of restoring informational balance rather than attacking pathogens. While these ideas align loosely with holistic medicine philosophies, they also raise questions about survivorship bias. Advanced civilizations capable of space travel would logically have resolved basic health vulnerabilities long before exploring the cosmos. Perhaps the most controversial claim regarding Pleiadian civilization concerns their alleged mastery of consciousness. Many contact accounts assert that Pleiadians perceive reality across multiple layers simultaneously, experiencing time not as a linear progression, but as a navigable dimension. This does not imply omniscience, but rather an expanded perceptual bandwidth, allowing them to access probabilistic futures and alternate outcomes. In this framework, what humans call intuition or foresight is considered a rudimentary form of a much broader cognitive faculty. This claim, while unverifiable, is central to explanations of how Pleiadians are said to observe Earth without overt interference. Ethically, Pleiadian narratives emphasize non-violation above all else. Direct intervention in developing civilizations is portrayed as a grave transgression, regardless of intent. This principle is often compared to the prime directive popularized in science fiction, though proponents argue that the concept predates modern media and reflects a universal law governing advanced intelligences. According to this belief, civilizations must be allowed to experience the consequences of their choices in order to evolve authentically. External rescue, even from catastrophic outcomes, is said to create dependency and stagnation rather than growth. This ethical stance is frequently cited as the reason Pleiadians allegedly do not reveal themselves openly to humanity. Mass contact, believers argue, would destabilize social, religious, and political systems overnight. The sudden confirmation of superior non-human intelligence could undermine human self-determination, collapse belief structures, and provoke either worship or panic. From this perspective, limited contact with individuals is considered the least disruptive method of engagement. These individuals, often labeled contactees, are said to be selected based on psychological resilience rather than status or influence. Critics point out that this reasoning conveniently explains the absence of physical evidence. If advanced beings cannot reveal themselves without harm, then lack of proof becomes a feature rather than a flaw of the narrative. Supporters counter that this argument mirrors ethical dilemmas in human contexts, such as non-interference with isolated cultures or ethical restrictions in psychological experimentation. The question, then, is not whether the logic is airtight, but whether it reflects an internally consistent belief system capable of persisting without contradiction. Another recurring element in descriptions of Pleiadian civilization is their alleged long lifespan. Contact accounts vary widely, with estimates ranging from several hundred to several thousand Earth years. Longevity is typically attributed to genetic stability, controlled environments, and advanced cellular regeneration. This extended lifespan is said to fundamentally alter societal priorities. With centuries to learn, create, and reflect, urgency gives way to patience, and short-term gain becomes irrelevant. War, in this context, is described as an archaic behavior incompatible with long-term continuity. Communication within Pleiadian society is almost universally described as telepathic, though not in the simplistic sense often portrayed in fiction. Rather than intrusive mind reading, telepathy is depicted as voluntary information exchange governed by consent. Language, in this framework, becomes supplementary rather than primary. This mode of communication is said to reduce deception, as intent and emotional context accompany transmitted information. Skeptics argue that such systems would collapse under the complexity of large populations, while proponents suggest that cognitive evolution naturally resolves these limitations. When examining these descriptions collectively, a pattern emerges. Pleiadian civilization is consistently portrayed as what humanity is not: non-hierarchical instead of authoritarian, cooperative instead of competitive, sustainable instead of extractive, introspective instead of expansionist. This raises an important analytical question. Are these descriptions evidence of an external civilization, or are they aspirational projections shaped by human dissatisfaction with current systems? The answer may not be binary. Belief systems often blend external speculation with internal critique, using imagined others to articulate desired futures. As we move forward, it becomes necessary to examine how and why these narratives gain traction at specific moments in history. The rise of Pleiadian contact literature coincided with nuclear proliferation, environmental awareness, and growing distrust in centralized authority. The idea of a civilization that survived similar crises by choosing cooperation over domination resonated deeply during periods of global anxiety. Whether intentional or not, the Pleiadian narrative functions as both cosmic speculation and social commentary. Ancient contact and human origins, the Pleiadian hypothesis. Claims of Pleiadian involvement with humanity do not begin in the modern era. Advocates of the Pleiadian hypothesis argue that traces of contact are embedded in ancient myths, sacred texts, and unexplained anomalies within early human history. According to this view, what modern societies label as mythology may represent symbolic or incomplete records of real interactions between early humans and non-human intelligences. The Pleiadians, in these narratives, are positioned not as gods in the traditional sense, but as advanced beings whose capabilities were interpreted through the limited conceptual frameworks available to ancient observers. One of the central claims in Pleiadian lore is that humanity did not evolve in isolation. Proponents point to the rapid emergence of anatomically modern humans approximately 200,000 years ago, followed by an equally abrupt acceleration in cognitive capacity around 50,000 years ago, often referred to as the cognitive revolution. While mainstream anthropology explains these shifts through natural selection, environmental pressure, and genetic mutation, alternative theorists suggest that external intervention may have acted as a catalyst. In this framework, Pleiadians are said to have introduced subtle genetic modifications designed to enhance abstract thinking, language complexity, and self-awareness. These claims often reference ancient creation myths that describe humanity being shaped, altered, or instructed by beings descending from the sky. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki are portrayed as creators who engineered humans to serve specific functions. In Mesoamerican traditions, gods arrive from the heavens to teach agriculture, astronomy, and governance. Indigenous Australian Dreamtime stories describe star beings who sang the world into existence. Pleiadian theorists argue that while these cultures were geographically isolated, the thematic similarities suggest a shared external influence rather than independent invention. Critics respond that such parallels are expected in human storytelling, as all societies grapple with similar existential questions: origin, purpose, and mortality. From this perspective, sky-based deities reflect universal human awe toward the cosmos rather than literal encounters. Yet proponents counter that some ancient knowledge appears anomalously advanced for its time. Examples often cited include precise astronomical alignments in megalithic structures, sophisticated calendar systems, and mathematical constants embedded in sacred architecture. While none of these elements require extraterrestrial explanation, their existence fuels speculation when viewed through a non-traditional lens. The Pleiades themselves appear repeatedly in ancient symbolism. Many early cultures tracked the heliacal rising of the Pleiades to mark agricultural cycles, seasonal change, and ritual calendars. This consistent emphasis has led some researchers to argue that the cluster held more than practical significance. In certain traditions, the Pleiades are described as the home of ancestral spirits, or the origin point of humanity itself. Pleiadian theorists interpret these references as encoded memories of an ancestral homeland rather than metaphorical constructs. According to these narratives, Pleiadian involvement in human development was neither continuous nor uniform. Instead, contact is said to have occurred during specific windows of opportunity, often following environmental or social disruption. These interventions allegedly focused on stabilizing populations, preserving knowledge, or seeding ethical frameworks designed to reduce large-scale self-destruction. Importantly, proponents emphasize that these actions were limited and indirect, consistent with the non-interventionist principles described earlier. Humans were guided, not controlled. One recurring theme in ancient contact narratives is the concept of teacher figures who arrive suddenly, impart transformative knowledge, and then depart. Figures such as Quetzalcoatl, Thoth, Viracocha and Oans are often cited as examples. These beings are described as tall, luminous, and non-hostile, frequently associated with the sea or sky rather than specific territories. They teach writing, agriculture, astronomy, and law, then disappear, sometimes promising to return. In Pleiadian interpretations, these figures are reclassified as representatives or emissaries rather than deities. Skeptics note that these stories often emerge during periods of social consolidation, when new systems of governance and belief are required to unify expanding populations. Teacher god narratives may therefore serve political and cultural functions, legitimizing authority and codifying norms. However, believers argue that this explanation does not account for the detailed consistency of descriptions across cultures separated by vast distances and time periods. The debate remains unresolved, in part because ancient narratives resist definitive interpretation. Another controversial element of the Pleiadian hypothesis is the claim that early advanced civilizations existed and were subsequently destroyed. Atlantis and Lemuria are frequently invoked as lost societies that achieved technological and spiritual sophistication before collapsing due to internal imbalance. Pleiadian narratives often place these civilizations within a broader cosmic context, suggesting they were partially influenced by extraterrestrial knowledge. Their destruction is presented as a cautionary tale, evidence that technological advancement without ethical coherence leads inevitably to collapse. From an archaeological standpoint, there is no conclusive evidence supporting the existence of Atlantis or Lemuria as described in esoteric literature. However, proponents argue that rising sea levels following the last ice age may have submerged coastal civilizations whose remains have yet to be discovered. They also suggest that mainstream archaeology is constrained by institutional inertia, limiting exploration of unconventional hypotheses. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which remains absent. The genetic component of the Pleiadian narrative extends beyond ancient intervention into ongoing human diversity. Some believers propose that certain lineages retain a higher proportion of Pleiadian genetic markers, often associating these traits with heightened empathy, creativity, or intuitive perception. These individuals are sometimes referred to as starseeds, a term popularized in New Age literature. While this concept lacks empirical support and risks reinforcing pseudo-biological hierarchies, it remains influential within spiritual communities seeking meaning and identity beyond conventional frameworks. Psychologically, the appeal of the Pleiadian origin story lies in its capacity to reconcile human contradictions. If humanity is partially derived from a more advanced civilization, then our potential for greatness and our propensity for self-destruction become two sides of the same inheritance. This narrative reframes human suffering not as failure, but as part of an unfinished evolutionary process. Whether literal or symbolic, it provides a context in which struggle is meaningful rather than arbitrary. As we assess these claims, it is important to distinguish between historical evidence and interpretive frameworks. Archaeology, genetics, and anthropology operate within methodological constraints designed to minimize speculation. Pleiadian narratives operate within a different epistemology, one that values testimony, intuition, and pattern recognition alongside empirical data. These systems are not easily reconciled, which explains why debates between skeptics and believers often generate more heat than clarity. Modern contact claims, communication, abduction, and telepathic narratives. As the modern era unfolded, claims of contact with non-human intelligences shifted away from ancient myth and into personal testimony. Beginning in the mid-20th century, reports of UFO sightings, close encounters, and direct communication increased dramatically, particularly in technologically advanced societies. Within this broader phenomenon, Pleiadian contact narratives emerged as a distinct category, differing in tone and content from accounts involving hostile or indifferent extraterrestrial beings. These modern claims form a crucial pillar of the Pleiadian belief system, as they are presented not as inherited stories, but as lived experiences. Unlike reports of abduction that emphasize fear, paralysis, or invasive procedures, Pleiadian contact accounts tend to describe encounters as calm, instructive, and voluntary. Individuals who claim contact often report being approached through dreams, altered states of consciousness, or spontaneous intuitive experiences rather than physical capture. Communication is almost always described as telepathic, with information transmitted as complete concepts rather than spoken language. This mode of interaction, proponents argue, explains why such encounters leave no physical evidence while still producing profound psychological impact. Contactees frequently describe an initial period of confusion or disbelief, followed by repeated experiences that gradually normalize the presence of non-human intelligence. Many report that these interactions are initiated during times of personal crisis, heightened curiosity, or existential questioning. From a psychological standpoint, this timing raises questions about suggestibility, stress-induced hallucination, or subconscious pattern making. However, those who experience contact often insist that the encounters feel qualitatively different from imagination or dream states, marked by heightened clarity, emotional neutrality, and a sense of external agency. A common feature across Pleiadian contact narratives is the transfer of information rather than instruction. Contactees describe being shown images, timelines, or symbolic representations related to human history, potential futures, or cosmic structure. These transmissions are rarely concrete or predictive in a verifiable sense. Instead, they emphasize themes of environmental responsibility, ethical coherence, and self-awareness. Critics argue that these messages closely mirror contemporary social concerns, suggesting that contact experiences may reflect internalized values rather than external guidance. Believers counter that the consistency of these themes across independent accounts points to a shared source. Physical descriptions of Pleiadians reported in modern encounters are notably uniform. They are typically described as tall, humanoid, and physically similar to humans, with lighter skin tones, symmetrical features, and expressive eyes. Clothing is often depicted as simple and form-fitting, lacking decorative elements or insignia. These descriptions align closely with earlier Nordic alien reports, reinforcing continuity within the narrative. Skeptics note that such imagery reflects Western aesthetic ideals rather than biological plausibility, while proponents argue that shared ancestry would logically produce similar morphology. Abduction claims involving Pleiadians occupy a controversial middle ground. While less common than narratives involving other alleged extraterrestrial groups, some individuals report being taken aboard craft for brief examinations or observational purposes. These experiences are usually described as non-threatening and consensual, though not always consciously initiated. Contactees often report missing time, fragmented memory, or delayed recall triggered by later experiences. Hypnosis is frequently used to recover these memories, a practice heavily criticized for its susceptibility to suggestion and confabulation. Medical examinations described in these accounts differ significantly from traditional abduction narratives. Rather than invasive procedures, Pleiadian encounters often emphasize monitoring, scanning, or energy-based assessment. The stated purpose is typically observation rather than experimentation. Believers interpret this as evidence of ethical restraint, while skeptics argue that the benign framing reflects a desire to maintain the image of Pleiadians as benevolent. Regardless of interpretation, these narratives contribute to the broader portrayal of Pleiadians as observers rather than manipulators. One of the most significant aspects of modern contact claims is their impact on the individuals involved. Many contactees report long-term changes in worldview, values, and behavior following their experiences. Common effects include increased environmental awareness, reduced materialism, and a heightened sense of interconnectedness. Some individuals leave conventional careers to pursue spiritual or humanitarian paths, attributing this shift directly to their encounters. From a psychological perspective, such transformations can be understood as meaning-making responses to intense experiences, whether internally or externally generated. The role of trauma in contact narratives remains contentious. While Pleiadian encounters are generally described as positive, some individuals report confusion, isolation, or difficulty integrating their experiences into daily life. Social stigma surrounding UFO contact claims often exacerbates these challenges, leading individuals to conceal their experiences or seek validation within niche communities. This dynamic creates feedback loops in which shared belief reinforces individual conviction, complicating efforts to distinguish personal experience from collective narrative formation. Another recurring element in modern Pleiadian contact literature is the concept of preparation. Contactees frequently report being told that humanity is approaching a critical threshold, technological, environmental, or psychological, that will determine its long-term trajectory. Pleiadians are said to be monitoring this process, offering subtle guidance while refraining from direct intervention. This framing places contact experiences within a broader temporal context, transforming isolated events into components of an unfolding plan. Critics argue that this structure resembles apocalyptic belief systems, perpetually deferring validation while sustaining engagement. Importantly, modern contact narratives rarely include specific dates, locations, or instructions that could be empirically tested. This absence of falsifiable claims protects the narrative from direct disconfirmation, but also limits its credibility within scientific frameworks. Supporters argue that advanced intelligences would avoid creating dependency or panic by withholding concrete predictions. Skeptics counter that this reasoning conveniently shields the narrative from scrutiny. As digital communication expanded, online forums and social media platforms enabled contactees to share experiences globally. This connectivity has led to increased narrative convergence, with common terminology, symbols, and themes spreading rapidly. While proponents view this as corroboration, critics point to the role of cultural transmission in shaping personal experiences. The distinction between independent testimony and shared storytelling becomes increasingly blurred in such environments. Despite these challenges, modern Pleiadian contact claims persist and continue to attract new adherents. Their resilience lies not in physical evidence, but in experiential conviction. For those involved, the experiences feel real, transformative, and meaningful, regardless of external validation. This raises a critical question: how should such claims be evaluated? Dismissing them outright risks overlooking genuine psychological phenomena, while accepting them uncritically risks reinforcing unfounded beliefs. The alleged Pleiadian agenda: observation, ethics, and human self-determination. At the center of nearly every Pleiadian narrative lies the question of intent. If such beings exist and have interacted with humanity across millennia, then purpose becomes unavoidable. Why observe Earth at all? Why engage selectively rather than openly? And why, according to believers, does contact intensify during periods of global instability? The answers offered by Pleiadian contact literature form what is often described as their agenda, though proponents insist this term is misleading. Rather than a plan imposed on humanity, the agenda is framed as a long-term observational responsibility, guided by ethical constraints rather than strategic objectives. According to these accounts, Earth is not unique in hosting intelligent life, but it is considered rare in terms of biological diversity and evolutionary volatility. Humanity's rapid technological acceleration, coupled with comparatively slow ethical integration, is said to make the planet a point of concern within a broader network of observing civilizations. The Pleiadians are described as one of several groups monitoring Earth, though often portrayed as among the most closely aligned with human development due to genetic or historical ties. This framing introduces the idea that Earth exists within a wider cosmic ecosystem governed by shared norms and limitations. One of the most frequently cited motivations attributed to the Pleiadians is the prevention of irreversible self-destruction. Nuclear weapons occupy a central place in this narrative. Contactees often report receiving information or imagery related to nuclear detonations, environmental fallout, and long-term planetary damage. These messages rarely advocate disarmament through political means. Instead, they emphasize awareness of consequences and the necessity of collective responsibility. Believers argue that the repeated focus on nuclear risk reflects genuine concern from civilizations that have either experienced similar crises or observed them elsewhere, Environmental collapse represents a second major theme within the alleged Pleiadian agenda. Deforestation, biodiversity loss, and climate instability are often cited as indicators of systemic imbalance rather than isolated problems. In Pleiadian narratives, planetary ecosystems are treated as integrated living systems rather than resources. Damage to one component is said to propagate throughout the whole. Contact messages related to environmental issues tend to avoid technical solutions, focusing instead on shifts in perception, how humanity conceptualizes its relationship to the planet. Critics note that this mirrors contemporary ecological philosophy, while supporters argue that convergent conclusions do not invalidate external origin. Importantly, Pleiadian narratives consistently reject the idea of rescue or salvation. There is no promise of intervention to prevent catastrophe, no fleet waiting to evacuate survivors, and no external authority prepared to enforce peace. This absence is framed not as indifference but as adherence to a principle of self-determination. Humanity, according to this view, must choose its own trajectory. External interference beyond minimal guidance is said to undermine authentic evolution, producing dependency rather than resilience. This stance is central to maintaining internal consistency within the belief system. The concept of choice appears repeatedly in contact literature. Humanity is portrayed as standing at a crossroads, with multiple potential futures branching from present decisions. Pleiadians are said to perceive these probabilities without privileging one outcome over another. Their role is to observe, document, and occasionally signal when thresholds are approached. This framing avoids determinism while still allowing for urgency. Critics argue that such narratives perpetually postpone accountability, as failure can always be reframed as an unchosen path rather than a flawed prediction. Another component of the alleged agenda involves the gradual normalization of non-human intelligence. Rather than a sudden revelation, Pleiadian narratives suggest that awareness will increase incrementally through cultural exposure, scientific discovery, and philosophical inquiry. UFO sightings, media portrayals, and public discussion are interpreted as preparatory steps rather than accidents. This interpretation transforms ambiguity into intention, suggesting that uncertainty itself serves a purpose by encouraging questioning without overwhelming existing belief structures. From a sociological perspective, this gradualist model mirrors how disruptive ideas historically enter human societies. Paradigm shifts rarely occur instantaneously. They emerge through overlapping narratives, contested evidence, and generational change. Whether or not Pleiadians exist, the belief that humanity must acclimate psychologically before encountering non-human intelligence reflects an understanding of social inertia and cognitive limitation. In this sense, the narrative aligns closely with human behavioral insight. Ethical non-intervention also extends to individual contact experiences. Contactees frequently report that information is offered, but never enforced. There are no demands for allegiance, worship, or obedience. Messages emphasize personal discernment rather than doctrine. This lack of centralized authority distinguishes Pleiadian narratives from traditional religious systems. Though critics argue that informal hierarchies emerge within contact communities regardless, even without formal leadership, shared interpretation can create de facto orthodoxy. Skeptical analysis raises important questions about motive projection. Humans have a long history of attributing their own values and concerns to imagined others, whether gods, spirits, or extraterrestrials. The Pleiadian agenda closely mirrors contemporary human anxieties: nuclear annihilation, ecological collapse, and loss of autonomy. This correspondence may indicate psychological externalization rather than external observation. However, proponents argue that advanced civilizations would naturally prioritize the same risks, making overlap inevitable rather than suspicious. Another unresolved issue concerns selectivity. If Pleiadians are monitoring humanity as a whole, why communicate with isolated individuals rather than institutions, scientists, or global leaders? Believers argue that institutional contact would be destabilizing and subject to misuse, while individual contact allows for diffusion of ideas without centralized control. Critics counter that this approach is inefficient and unverifiable, again protecting the narrative from scrutiny. The tension between plausibility and evidentiary absence remains a defining feature of the agenda debate. Over time, the alleged Pleiadian agenda has evolved in response to changing global conditions. Early contact literature focused heavily on nuclear war during the Cold War era. Later narratives shifted toward environmental and psychological themes as ecological awareness increased. This adaptability suggests either responsive intelligence or narrative malleability. Determining which interpretation is more accurate depends largely on epistemological assumptions rather than data. Ultimately, the Pleiadian agenda functions as both hypothesis and mirror. It proposes an external perspective on humanity while reflecting internal struggles with power, responsibility, and survival. Whether viewed as extraterrestrial concern or human projection, it frames humanity as accountable not only to itself, but to a broader context of existence. This reframing can be empowering or unsettling, depending on interpretation. Scientific and skeptical analysis, evidence, psychology, and methodological limits. Any serious examination of Pleiadian claims must confront the absence of physical evidence. Science advances through observation, measurement, and repeatability. And by these standards, the Pleiadian hypothesis remains unverified. No confirmed artifacts, biological samples, or unambiguous recordings have been produced that withstand independent scrutiny. This lack of material proof forms the core of skeptical critique and defines the boundary between belief and empiricism. Yet the persistence of Pleiadian narratives raises a deeper question: how should claims be evaluated when they are framed to avoid direct detectability? From an astrophysical perspective, the Pleiades present immediate challenges to the idea of hosting an ancient, technologically advanced civilization. The cluster's stars are relatively young, forming long after Earth itself. Mainstream astronomy therefore considers the development of complex life in the Pleiades unlikely, at least in conventional biological terms. Proponents respond by invoking non-physical habitats, artificial constructs, or older, now unobservable systems associated with the cluster rather than the visible stars themselves. While these possibilities cannot be conclusively disproven, they shift the hypothesis beyond testable science and into speculative cosmology. Distance poses another obstacle. At approximately 440 light-years from Earth, even civilizations capable of advanced propulsion would face significant constraints. Pleiadian narratives address this by proposing technologies that manipulate space-time, gravity, or dimensional access, rather than relying on relativistic travel. These concepts, while theoretically discussed in advanced physics, remain unproven and technologically speculative. Skeptics argue that invoking unknown technologies to explain unknown beings creates a closed loop immune to falsification. Psychological explanations offer an alternative framework for understanding contact experiences. Human cognition is highly adept at pattern recognition, narrative construction, and meaning-making, particularly under conditions of uncertainty or emotional intensity. Altered states of consciousness, whether induced by stress, meditation, sleep disruption, or trauma, can produce vivid experiences perceived as external encounters. Neuroimaging studies show that internally generated imagery can feel as real and autonomous as sensory perception, especially when emotional salience is high. Sleep-related phenomena such as hypnagogic hallucinations, sleep paralysis, and lucid dreaming are frequently cited in analyses of contact experiences. These states can involve sensations of presence, communication without speech, and perceived movement or transport. Cultural context plays a critical role in shaping how such experiences are interpreted. In societies where extraterrestrial narratives are prevalent, anomalous experiences may be framed as alien contact rather than spiritual visitation or psychological disturbance. This does not imply deception, but interpretation filtered through expectation. The use of hypnosis to recover contact memories further complicates evaluation. While hypnosis can enhance recall of subjective experience, it also increases susceptibility to suggestion and confabulation. Research consistently demonstrates that hypnotically retrieved memories are not inherently more accurate than non-hypnotic recall. Skeptics argue that hypnosis-based contact accounts reflect narrative reinforcement rather than recovered events. Proponents counter that dismissing all hypnotic testimony ignores the possibility of repressed or non-ordinary memory storage. The scientific consensus, however, remains cautious. Sociological factors also play a significant role in sustaining Pleiadian belief systems. Communities centered around shared extraordinary experiences provide validation, identity, and belonging. Within these groups, individual accounts are often interpreted collectively, creating a reinforcing feedback loop. Over time, narrative convergence occurs, not necessarily through fabrication, but through shared language and symbolic frameworks. This process can produce remarkable consistency without requiring a common external source. Media influence cannot be ignored. Science fiction, documentaries, and online platforms have shaped public imagery of extraterrestrial life for decades. The Nordic appearance attributed to Pleiadians predates many modern contact claims, raising questions about cultural imprinting. Skeptics argue that contact narratives recycle familiar tropes, while proponents suggest that consistency across time indicates a stable external reference. Distinguishing between these interpretations remains challenging. Another methodological issue lies in the nature of the claims themselves. Pleiadian narratives rarely offer testable predictions or verifiable data. Instead, they emphasize personal transformation, ethical reflection, and long-term observation. From a scientific standpoint, this renders the claims unfalsifiable. From a philosophical standpoint, it raises questions about the limits of empirical inquiry. Not all human experiences are easily quantified, yet not all experiences correspond to external reality. Navigating this distinction is one of the central challenges in evaluating extraordinary claims. Some researchers propose a middle ground interpretation that contact experiences may be real psychological events with symbolic rather than literal content. In this view, Pleiadians function as archetypal representations of humanity's aspirations, fears, and moral intuitions. The consistency of messages regarding environmental stewardship and ethical responsibility reflects shared human concerns rather than external instruction. This interpretation does not deny the sincerity or impact of the experiences, but reframes their origin. However, this symbolic model does not fully account for the depth of conviction reported by contactees. Many describe their experiences as fundamentally other, marked by a sense of external agency and informational density that exceeds ordinary imagination. Whether this reflects unknown cognitive processes or genuine external interaction remains unresolved. Science currently lacks the tools to definitively differentiate between these possibilities. Importantly, skepticism does not equate to dismissal. Scientific history includes numerous phenomena once considered implausible that later became established fact. At the same time, many extraordinary claims have failed under scrutiny. Maintaining openness without abandoning rigor is essential. The Pleiadian hypothesis occupies a liminal space between these outcomes, resisting resolution due to both evidentiary gaps and conceptual elasticity. Pleiadians and modern spirituality, consciousness, New Age thought, and cultural resonance. As scientific skepticism challenges the literal interpretation of Pleiadian claims, another domain has embraced them with increasing openness: modern spirituality. Over the past several decades, Pleiadian narratives have become deeply embedded within New Age movements, consciousness studies, and alternative metaphysical frameworks. In these contexts, the question of physical existence often becomes secondary to symbolic function. Pleiadians are not always treated as extraterrestrial organisms in the biological sense, but as advanced consciousness entities operating across dimensions, frequencies, or states of awareness beyond conventional perception. Within these belief systems, consciousness is regarded as the primary substrate of reality rather than matter. Physical form is viewed as a temporary expression rather than a defining feature of intelligence. From this perspective, the Pleiadians are not bound to star systems in the way humans understand geography. the association with the Pleiades becomes symbolic, a point of origin, resonance, or energetic alignment rather than a literal address. This reinterpretation allows the narrative to bypass astrophysical constraints while preserving its core themes. Channeling plays a central role in this spiritual framing. Individuals known as channels claim to receive information directly from Pleiadian consciousness through meditative or trance-like states. These communications often take the form of philosophical discourse, guidance on personal development, or commentary on planetary transitions. Unlike earlier contact narratives that emphasized observation and warning, channeled messages frequently focus on inner transformation, emotional healing, and expansion of awareness. The shift reflects a broader cultural movement away from external authority and toward internal experience as a source of truth. In these contexts, Pleiadians are often described as operating on higher vibrational planes, where individuality exists without ego and knowledge is shared without distortion. Human emotional struggles, fear, competition, scarcity are portrayed as artifacts of lower density consciousness rather than inherent flaws. The goal of human evolution, according to this framework, is not technological dominance, but vibrational alignment with more coherent states of being. Pleiadians serve as exemplars rather than overseers, illustrating what is possible rather than dictating what must be done. The concept of ascension is closely tied to this interpretation. Ascension does not imply physical departure from Earth, but a shift in perceptual and ethical orientation. Pleiadian messages often describe Earth as undergoing a transitional phase, moving toward greater collective awareness. Humanity's role is to participate consciously in this process rather than resist it. Environmental crises, social upheaval, and technological disruption are reframed as catalysts for transformation rather than signs of inevitable collapse. Critics argue that this spiritualization of extraterrestrial narratives dilutes their original claims, transforming concrete hypotheses into unfalsifiable metaphors. However, supporters contend that this flexibility is a strength rather than a weakness. By adapting to cultural context, the Pleiadian narrative remains relevant across changing intellectual landscapes. What began as speculation about beings in spacecraft evolves into a language for discussing consciousness, ethics, and planetary responsibility. From a psychological standpoint, the integration of Pleiadian themes into spirituality addresses unmet needs within traditional religious and scientific paradigms. Many individuals seek meaning without dogma, transcendence without hierarchy, and purpose without predestination. Pleiadian narratives offer a cosmology that is expansive yet personal, situating individual experience within a vast but non-judgmental universe. This appeal helps explain why such beliefs often attract individuals disillusioned with institutional authority. The emphasis on personal resonance, rather than belief, also distinguishes modern Pleiadian spirituality from earlier contact movements. Rather than asking adherents to accept specific doctrines, these systems encourage subjective validation. If a message feels true, it is considered meaningful, regardless of external verification. This epistemological shift aligns with broader postmodern trends that prioritize lived experience over universal narratives. While empowering for some, it complicates critical evaluation and increases susceptibility to confirmation bias. Cultural resonance is further reinforced through language that blends scientific terminology with metaphysical concepts. References to frequencies, energy fields, and dimensions borrow legitimacy from physics while remaining metaphorical in application. This hybrid vocabulary creates a sense of coherence without requiring technical precision. Skeptics caution that such language can obscure the boundary between metaphor and mechanism, while proponents argue that emerging science may eventually provide frameworks for understanding phenomena currently described symbolically. Importantly, Pleiadian spirituality often emphasizes non-exclusivity. There is no singular path, chosen group, or final revelation, humanity is depicted as one of many expressions of cosmic intelligence, each contributing to a larger tapestry. This pluralistic outlook contrasts sharply with belief systems that center on salvation, judgment, or cosmic hierarchy. It also reduces conflict with other worldviews, allowing individuals to integrate Pleiadian concepts alongside existing beliefs rather than replacing them. As these ideas circulate through books, workshops, and online platforms, they increasingly influence popular discourse around consciousness and extraterrestrial life. Even individuals who reject the literal existence of Pleiadians may adopt related concepts, such as planetary stewardship, interconnectedness, and ethical evolution. In this sense, the narrative exerts influence regardless of factual status, shaping values and priorities through symbolic power. The convergence of extraterrestrial mythology and spirituality raises an important question. Does it matter whether Pleiadians exist physically if their narrative produces meaningful change? For science, factual accuracy is paramount. For culture and psychology, impact may be equally significant. The answer depends on the criteria used to evaluate truth, empirical correspondence, or experiential resonance. Pleiadians, UFO disclosure, and the politics of secrecy. As belief in Pleiadians expanded beyond individual contact experiences and spiritual communities, it increasingly intersected with broader narratives about government secrecy and unidentified aerial phenomena. For many adherents, the absence of official acknowledgement does not weaken the Pleiadian hypothesis, but reinforces it. The argument follows a familiar logic. If non-human intelligences are interacting with Earth, governments would have strong incentives to conceal that reality to preserve social order, political power, and technological advantage. Within this framework, Pleiadians are often positioned as known but undisclosed participants in a hidden geopolitical reality. Claims of government knowledge regarding extraterrestrial contact emerged alongside early UFO sightings in the mid-20th century. Reports of unidentified objects performing maneuvers beyond known aircraft capabilities prompted military investigation, most notably through projects such as Project Blue Book. While official conclusions attributed sightings to misidentification or insufficient data, skeptics within the UFO community argued that these explanations were intentionally reductive. Pleiadian narratives absorbed this skepticism, suggesting that benevolent extraterrestrial groups were being conflated with hostile or unknown phenomena to justify secrecy. In some versions of the narrative, Pleiadians are contrasted with other alleged non-human intelligences said to have different motives or ethical standards. Pleiadians are portrayed as observers aligned with human autonomy, while secrecy is attributed to agreements or tensions between governments and less benevolent entities. These claims remain entirely speculative, yet they persist because they provide explanatory coherence for inconsistencies in official statements and declassified documents. The lack of transparent information creates interpretive space where multiple narratives can coexist. Recent developments in UFO disclosure discourse have further energized these beliefs. Government acknowledgement of unidentified aerial phenomena without definitive explanation has shifted public conversation from dismissal to cautious curiosity. While no official sources have identified Pleiadians or any specific extraterrestrial group, the admission that some observed objects remain unexplained is interpreted by believers as partial validation. The gap between acknowledgement and explanation sustains speculation, allowing Pleiadian narratives to adapt rather than collapse. From a political standpoint, secrecy surrounding advanced technologies, whether terrestrial or otherwise, is not unprecedented. Governments routinely classify information related to national security, experimental aircraft, and surveillance systems. Skeptics argue that most UFO sightings can be explained within this context, without invoking extraterrestrial origin. However, proponents of the Pleiadian hypothesis counter that the scale and duration of reported phenomena exceed what could plausibly be concealed for decades, particularly given global observation and civilian reporting. The concept of disclosure itself occupies a central place in modern Pleiadian narratives. Disclosure is framed not as a single event, but as a gradual process involving cultural readiness, psychological resilience, and ethical maturity. Pleiadians, according to this view, would not support forced revelation through governmental channels. Instead, awareness would emerge organically through education, scientific discovery, and shifts in collective perception. This interpretation aligns with earlier themes of non-intervention and personal discernment. Public trust plays a critical role in how these narratives are received. Declining confidence in institutions has created fertile ground for alternative explanations of unexplained phenomena. When official narratives are perceived as incomplete or contradictory, unofficial accounts gain traction regardless of evidentiary strength. Pleiadian narratives benefit from this environment by offering a coherent moral framework in contrast to opaque bureaucracy. Whether accurate or not, they fulfill a demand for meaning amid uncertainty. Critics caution that conflating extraterrestrial speculation with political distrust can lead to unfounded conclusions and erode rational discourse. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and skepticism toward authority does not justify acceptance of unverified narratives. Yet history demonstrates that secrecy and misinformation have occurred in other domains, complicating blanket dismissal. The challenge lies in maintaining critical inquiry without defaulting to either cynicism or credulity. The intersection of Pleiadian belief and disclosure movements also reflects a broader cultural shift in how authority is negotiated. Knowledge is no longer monopolized by institutions. It circulates through decentralized networks, where consensus forms through repetition rather than verification. In this environment, narratives that resonate emotionally and ethically can spread rapidly, independent of empirical grounding. Pleiadian narratives thrive in this space by offering a vision of the cosmos that is both expansive and reassuring. As disclosure debates continue, the Pleiadian hypothesis remains adaptable. If future discoveries reveal microbial life, advanced technology, or entirely novel forms of intelligence, interpretations will shift accordingly. For believers, any expansion of cosmic context supports the plausibility of advanced civilizations. For skeptics, such discoveries reinforce the need for careful differentiation between evidence-based conclusions and speculative extrapolation. Enduring mysteries and internal contradictions, why the Pleiadian narrative persists. Despite decades of speculation, testimony, and reinterpretation, the Pleiadian narrative remains unresolved. No single discovery has confirmed or refuted it, and no definitive event has forced a reckoning with its claims. Instead, the narrative persists in a state of suspension, sustained by unanswered questions and internal tensions that resist closure. These unresolved elements are not peripheral, they are central to the story's longevity. Understanding why the Pleiadian hypothesis endures requires examining the mysteries it generates as much as the answers it proposes. One of the most significant unresolved questions concerns consistency. While many Pleiadian accounts align in tone and theme, they diverge in detail. Descriptions of origin, structure, and purpose vary across sources. Some narratives place Pleiadians firmly within the physical Pleiades star cluster, while others relocate them to parallel dimensions or time-shifted realities. Some describe direct genetic intervention, others deny any manipulation beyond observation. These discrepancies challenge the idea of a single coherent external civilization. Believers often interpret variation as perspective-dependent interpretation, while skeptics see evidence of narrative construction rather than shared contact. Time presents another enduring mystery. Pleiadian accounts frequently describe non-linear temporal perception, allowing access to multiple potential futures. Yet these narratives consistently avoid concrete predictions. Warnings are general, outcomes conditional, and timelines fluid. This flexibility preserves plausibility, but undermines verifiability. If futures are probabilistic rather than fixed, then failure to predict specific events can always be explained as outcome divergence. This structure protects the narrative from disconfirmation while simultaneously preventing validation. The question of scale also remains unresolved. If Pleiadians are part of a broader network of observing civilizations, why do their messages dominate contact literature compared to other alleged groups? Why do narratives center on one benevolent source rather than a diverse array of perspectives? Proponents argue that cultural compatibility and genetic similarity explain this focus. Critics suggest that human preference for familiar, human-like entities shapes which narratives gain traction. The prominence of Pleiadians may therefore reflect psychological comfort rather than cosmic reality. Another internal tension lies in the balance between non-intervention and communication. Pleiadian narratives emphasize ethical restraint, yet sustained communication with individuals inevitably influences beliefs and behavior. Even subtle guidance can shape outcomes over time. This raises questions about where influence ends and intervention begins. Believers argue that providing information without enforcement preserves autonomy. Skeptics counter that any selective communication introduces bias, privileging certain individuals or interpretations over others. The mystery of selection remains particularly contentious. Contactees are rarely scientists, policymakers, or cultural leaders. They are often ordinary individuals whose experiences remain private or marginal. If the goal is species-level awareness or ethical development, this mode of engagement appears inefficient. Supporters argue that influence spreads indirectly through ideas rather than authority. Critics view this as another narrative convenience that avoids institutional scrutiny while maintaining plausibility. Physical absence continues to define the Pleiadian mystery. No confirmed landings, no public artifacts, no incontrovertible signals. For believers, this absence is intentional, consistent with ethical non-interference and gradual acclimation. For skeptics, it is decisive. The same absence supports both interpretations, depending on prior assumptions. This dual usability makes the narrative exceptionally resilient. Evidence is not required to sustain belief, and lack of evidence does not dismantle it. Cultural adaptation further complicates evaluation. As global concerns shift, Pleiadian narratives evolve. Nuclear war dominated early contact literature. Environmental collapse and consciousness expansion dominate later accounts. This responsiveness can be interpreted as ongoing relevance or retroactive alignment, determining which requires independent verification that remains unavailable. The narrative's ability to mirror contemporary anxieties ensures its continued resonance regardless of external reality. There is also the question of authorship. Many Pleiadian messages are delivered through books, lectures, and media products. While financial gain does not automatically invalidate belief, it introduces incentives that complicate trust. Some individuals claim no desire for recognition or profit, while others build careers around their experiences. Separating sincere conviction from performative belief becomes increasingly difficult as narratives commercialize. Yet focusing solely on contradictions risks overlooking the narrative's functional coherence. Despite variation, core themes persist: ethical responsibility, planetary stewardship, non-domination, and conscious choice. These themes form a stable moral framework that transcends specific claims. Even critics acknowledge that the Pleiadian narrative articulates values widely regarded as constructive. Whether these values originate from external intelligence or internal reflection remains an open question, but their persistence suggests they meet a psychological or cultural need. The endurance of the Pleiadian narrative also reflects humanity's relationship with uncertainty. Not all questions yield definitive answers within a single generation or methodological framework. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence remains ongoing, and human understanding of consciousness is incomplete. In this context, narratives that occupy the space between known and unknown function as exploratory tools. They allow speculation without finality, imagination without closure. Ultimately, the mystery of the Pleiadians may be inseparable from the mystery of humanity itself. The narrative externalizes questions humans ask internally. Who are we? Where did we come from? Are we alone? Can we survive our own power? By placing these questions within a cosmic context, the Pleiadian hypothesis reframes them as shared rather than solitary concerns. Whether or not the beings described exist, the questions they provoke are real. Conclusion, meaning, projection, and humanity's place in the cosmos. As the Pleiadian narrative is examined in full, its origins, claims, contradictions, and cultural evolution, it becomes clear that its significance cannot be measured solely by the question of literal existence. Whether Pleiadians are extraterrestrial beings, interdimensional intelligences, symbolic constructs, or psychological archetypes, the narrative persists because it addresses fundamental human concerns that remain unresolved. In this sense, the story of the Pleiadians is as much about humanity as it is about the stars. Across centuries, humans have repeatedly framed their origins and futures in relation to the cosmos. Ancient myths, religious cosmologies, and modern scientific inquiry all reflect a desire to situate human life within a larger order. The Pleiadian narrative continues this tradition using contemporary language and concerns. It draws from astronomy, genetics, psychology, and ethics, blending them into a framework that feels both expansive and intimate. This hybridity allows it to bridge gaps between science and spirituality, skepticism and belief. One of the most revealing aspects of the Pleiadian narrative is its moral orientation. Unlike many extraterrestrial invasion stories or apocalyptic prophecies, it does not position humanity as powerless or condemned. Instead, it emphasizes agency, responsibility, and choice. Humanity is portrayed as capable of growth but vulnerable to self-inflicted collapse. External observers, if they exist, do not rescue or judge, they watch and wait. This framing places the burden of outcome squarely on human decisions rather than cosmic intervention. From a psychological perspective, this orientation is significant. Narratives that remove agency often foster helplessness or dependency. The Pleiadian story does the opposite. It suggests that awareness, cooperation, and ethical coherence are prerequisites for survival, regardless of external presence. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, this message aligns with challenges humanity demonstrably faces. Environmental degradation, technological imbalance, and social fragmentation are real issues independent of extraterrestrial influence. The narrative also reflects a deep ambivalence about authority. Governments, institutions, and traditional belief systems are portrayed as limited or compromised, while insight emerges from individual experience and collective awareness. This distrust is not unique to Pleiadian lore. It mirrors broader societal trends. The figure of the benevolent observer, advanced, ethical, non-coercive, serves as a counterpoint to perceived human failures of leadership and stewardship. In doing so, the narrative offers both critique and aspiration. Importantly, the Pleiadian hypothesis avoids final answers. There is no definitive revelation, no climactic disclosure, no singular event that resolves uncertainty. This open-endedness is not accidental. It allows the narrative to evolve alongside human knowledge and cultural change. As science advances and worldviews shift, interpretations adapt. This flexibility ensures longevity, but it also places responsibility on the individual to navigate belief without certainty. For skeptics, the absence of evidence remains decisive. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and the Pleiadian narrative does not meet that standard. From this perspective, its value lies not in factual accuracy, but in what it reveals about human cognition and culture. It demonstrates how humans construct meaning under uncertainty, how myths adapt to modern contexts, and how ethical concerns find expression through imaginative frameworks. For believers, the lack of proof is not disqualifying. Reality, they argue, extends beyond what current instruments can measure. Consciousness, intention, and experience are treated as valid forms of evidence. In this worldview, the Pleiadians are not fantasies, but participants in a reality that science has yet to fully describe. The debate between these positions reflects deeper philosophical differences about the nature of knowledge itself. What unites both perspectives is recognition of humanity's unfinished story. Whether alone or observed, humanity stands at a pivotal moment. Technological capability now outpaces ethical integration, and global consequences arise from local actions. The Pleiadian narrative dramatizes this imbalance by placing it under cosmic observation. Even if no one is watching, the effect is the same. Accountability becomes unavoidable. In the end, the mystery of the Pleiadians may not be resolved by discovery or disclosure. It may persist as a lens through which humanity examines itself. Stories of advanced others looking back at Earth invite reflection on who we are becoming and what kind of civilization we choose to build. They ask whether intelligence without wisdom is sustainable, and whether survival depends less on innovation than on cooperation. The stars have always served as mirrors for human imagination. The Pleiades, bright and ancient in the night sky, continue that role in a modern form. Whether home to distant beings or simply a canvas for projection, they remind humanity of its smallness and its potential. The enduring power of the Pleiadian narrative lies not in proving what exists beyond Earth, but in challenging humanity to decide what it will become.
Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I love hearing from you. Check out more videos on the screen, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.